Everyone. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you for letting me come. I will begin by apologizing that I am not a psychologist. So I am an economist in training. And so I am not as familiar with the literature as all of you are. And so I've appreciated so far. I have about 3 pages of notes from all of your talks. And so fortunately, we're interested in the same topic. And I look forward to learning from you a lot more. So my collaborator is Glenn Milstein. He is in the Department of Psychology at the City College of New York, as am I. He is not here with us today. He is with us in spirit, he claims. And our project, the project today is looking at attitudes toward immigration using latent class analysis, which was not possible to do until 2012 once I tell you about the data. So just to give you a little bit of context with what we're trying to do and where we're going. Slide. Forgive me. So as we're all very quickly trying to forget, this current presidential competition or election year was marked by having 2 candidates that had extremely disparate views on immigration policy. In particular, Donald Trump's openly restrictionist views talked about building a wall, having mass deportations of individuals living here illegally, and even though he softened in that position, according to Business Insider, his voters did not, as we're seeing in what's happening these days. Called for extreme vetting of refugees, looking for a shutdown of immigrants, and he's now talking about a national registry. Whereas the other candidate, Hillary Clinton, was really not having any issues with the border, saying it was very secure. She was promoting a path to citizenship and even saying we want to open the doors. We want to be a country that includes others, in particular Syrian refugees. So while we had one candidate that was promoting shutting down the doors and in fact expelling individuals, we had another candidate that was looking for opening the doors. And so these 2 very disparate views made immigration really, at one point, even though it was the second most important thing or predictor of the results, at one point it was extremely central to the whole politics argument. So we wanted to see if we could create a baseline of the typology of public opinion toward immigration. Looking back 4 years before this election cycle, we wanted to see if there was a structure or a structural way in which we could look at public opinion regarding immigration and also consider the socioeconomic and psychological factors that influence that structure. Basically, the idea is to understand where was the general public 4 years ago with regards to immigration and where would they be now. And that where would they be now is something that we need to answer later on once 2016 data become available. So to look at this issue, because as junior faculty, I have really no grant money. I have to use data that are publicly available. So we looked at the American National Election Studies, ANES, which is a representative survey of the US electorate. And by and large, the data set had been obtained, collected during presidential and midterm election years after the year 2008. This particular time series study, which is the one I focus on, was collected every 4 years. So there were some years, and no longer the every 2-year kind of time series. It is an academic source, a collaboration between University of Michigan and Stanford, and it asks individuals to state their opinion on many different policy matters. Since the 90s, early 90s, the respondents were asked one particular question about immigration policy, which is the levels of immigration. What is your preferred level of immigration? Should we increase or keep the same or decrease? But in 2012, they added 4 more questions about immigration, and that opened the doors for an analysis, for other statistical analyses such as latent class analysis, which is what I want to talk about today. Okay, so the questions that were asked in 2012, there were total of 5. They covered issues about government policy. What is your opinion regarding government policy toward unauthorized immigrants? Should we make them illegal or felons and send back to their country? Have a guest worker program to allow unauthorized immigrants to stay in the U.S., allow them to stay with certain requirements or without penalties. Those were the only options. And of course, the NA or don't answer, which luckily for this study was not that big of an issue. Missing data was not a problem. Regarding citizenship to illegal aliens who entered as children, favoring or not status checks on people suspected to be undocumented, and the perpetual question on immigration levels, whether it should be increased a lot, a little, same, decrease a little, or decrease a lot. And last, they asked questions regarding individuals' perceptions of whether immigrants take jobs away from natives, whether extremely, very somewhat, or not at all. So if we wanted to think about these questions as something that we could maybe educate the public in, the only question that we could maybe possibly consider whether, assuming no confirmation bias exists, that we can really educate individuals with regards to whether immigrants take away jobs or not. We got plenty of data showing that they don't. So we looked at these questions and we analyzed them using latent class analysis, which is, I tried to avoid all the technical jargon, but I'd be happy to talk about that with anybody who's interested. It's really a statistical method that is analogous to cluster analysis that considers, it's an exploratory approach that places individuals or finds these natural clusters of groupings among individuals. And it's all based on the response patterns. Typically, it's used for data that are measured on a categorical basis, like survey data consistently is. Because it is an exploratory model, we have to run the model many different times, assuming the least number of classes possible up to a certain number. And we look at different information criteria that to make a decision with regards to how many classes is the best, constitute the best fit. And there's almost always a disagreement, or there's almost always in these type of analyses more than one solution. It could be 4, it could be 5, it could be 6 classes. So then we look at model interpretability to decide which is the best fit. Once we do that, the outcome variable that we get is a categorical variable, which each category represents the class, the latent classes that exist. And we then define the classes by the item response probabilities, which roughly translates into the proportion of individuals who in that class would answer a question in a particular way. So once we have that, then we can actually look at predictors of these latent class membership using logistic regression models. So the first step is to find out what is a typology, how many classes explain or can model public opinion or the different response patterns that exist for all these questions. And then the second step is to identify which are the predictors of latent class membership or membership in a particular class. So just to show you very quickly the results of the exploratory approach. I have a pointer. Okay, so we ran the model for 2 classes, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And the idea here is to get the model that best fits the data is the model that minimizes these 2 criteria, the Bayesian information criteria and the consistent archaic information criteria. And if there is a disagreement, because we can see right here that there is a potential 5 or 6 classes, there's not much difference in the drop in those information criteria. After 6, the information criteria goes up. Therefore, that's not a solution. So 5 or 6 classes constitute the solution, and because we started looking at these and model interpretability told us 5 is the best fit. So we went with 5 classes, and these are characterized by or can be described by these item response probabilities. So just to give you an idea, and the names of the classes, by the way, it's where creativity comes in, so probably very lacking at this point. I'm sure better names could be obtained, but that's what we can come up with at the moment. So for the first class is the most restrictionist class. In that, that group, individuals in that class are highly likely to respond to the question of the U.S. policy for unauthorized immigrants to make them felons and send back to their home country. In fact, 70% of individuals in that class would respond in that way. They're highly likely to oppose providing citizenship to illegal immigrants who came here as children. Very, very likely to favor status checks, want immigration levels to be decreased a lot, and they extremely believe that immigrants take away jobs from natives. So that's the first class, highly restrictive. Second class, we thought it would be moderate restrictionist. It's the second most restrictive class. They also favor citizenship to, they favor citizenships to illegal aliens who came here as children, but they also favor status checks and also want immigration levels to decrease a lot, as well think that immigrants extremely take away jobs from natives. So any class beyond class 1, they'll pretty much have a consistent opinion regarding policy for unauthorized immigrants, stay in the U.S. with requirements. They start differing then in terms of how they view the levels of immigration and whether immigrants take away jobs, and to a certain extent, the citizenship to illegal aliens. So they go in order from most restrictive to most accepting, and the last class, class 5, is those individuals who 90% of them favor citizenship to illegal aliens, 80% oppose status checks. They want immigration to be kept same as now, but they really don't believe that immigrants take away jobs from natives. So even in the most accepting class, least restrictive, we're seeing that this message, this keep levels of immigration same as now. So it's not necessarily consistent with Hillary's message of let's open the doors for newcomers. So even though we have 5 classes that range from most restrictive to most accepting, we're still seeing kind of like a plateau in terms of how we view or how individuals view immigration going forward, leave the same. The extent to which this is a status quo bias, we don't really know. We can't really measure by this data. So then we wanted to get an idea about the size of these classes to see if which one constitutes the majority of the population, and really they don't. We have pretty much uniform distribution in the sense that no single class constitutes a majority. We have the high restrictionist class, those who want to make unauthorized immigrants felons. They don't want citizenship for any unauthorized immigrants, status checks, and so on. That's 14% of the population. And we keep moving about the same. It's about the same size for the second most restrictionist group. Then we have some middle group here that we believe could go in either direction, if you wanted to consider, political affiliation here. And the most accepting crowd, individuals, is 28% of the population. Still not the majority, but it shows that it has some size to it. So then we look at now, once we have an understanding of these latent classes, and again, these are mutually exclusive groups, there are clear distinctions among them, even though it's kind of like an ordinal nature of a distinction where one is most restrictive and the other one is most accepting. Then we wanted to really understand what are the predictors of these, of the membership of these latent classes. So we looked at ethnicity, education, gender, age, the usual suspects, right? Income. Then we looked at a measure of social trust. How much do you trust people, perception of finances, and the extent to which the individuals value their American identity. So with regards to social trust, we of course had no constructs here. This is everything that is available by the data set. So social trust was measured by the person's opinion and how often can people be trusted. The American identity is how important is being American to your identity. Level of highest education, we had race and ethnicity. Of course, it was limited to white, black, and Hispanic. The other group, which is only almost 6% of the sample, included Asians, included Native Americans, and anybody who did not want to check the white, black, or Hispanic box. Family income above or below the median income, gender, and age. So we considered all of these factors in the multivariate regression model to see which of these matter the most. Now this table presents the odds ratio where the comparison or the reference class is the highest restrictionist category. So the odds ratio are giving us an indication of the odds of any particular group within these variables, that's measured by these variables, of belonging to the stated class above relative to the high restrictionist class. An odds ratio of 1 really indicates that the odds are no different for any given group. So for example, college degree has an odds of 1, meaning that individuals with a college degree have equal odds as individuals without a college degree of belonging in the moderate restrictionist class relative to the high restrictionist class. So, and that's pretty consistent with literature that shows the effect of education. I mean, what we're saying here is that having education is really not going to shift you from very, very restrictive to, well, you're somewhat restrictive. It's going to shift individuals from very restrictive to very accepting. So odds ratio that are greater than 1 indicate that a person or anybody measured by that variable is more likely to belong in the category stated relative to the high restrictionist, and the opposite is true for less than 1, odds ratio of less than 1. So we could look at this table all day, and I could talk about it all day. So I'd rather not. I'd rather show you some pictures that actually display the information a lot more, a lot easier, I think. So when we look at the odds ratio for social trust, the importance given to the American identity, and my perception on personal finances, what we're seeing is that they're all significant. They all have a large effect. So for individuals with people who trust others, who say we can trust others either always or at least half the time, are almost 2 times more likely to be in the highest accepting category than in the most restrictionist category. And if we look at the importance of the American identity, the odds are almost 3. I lost my light. So people who don't really consider their being an American as extremely important to their identity are 3 times more likely to be in the highest accepting category. And people who view their finances now to be better or same as last year, this whole notion of my perception of my economic status or my economic well-being, are 3.5 times more likely to be in the highest accepting group relative to the most restrictive group. And the other bars compare the highest accepting category to all others combined together, just to give you an indication of the odds ratio there. Oops. So when we look at education, the odds are even higher. People with a graduate degree are much more likely than people without a graduate degree to be in the highest accepting category versus the most restrictionist. And the college degree also has an impact. So then comes ethnicity. Hispanics are about 4 times more likely to be in the highest accepting crowd, in highest accepting group, than the highest restrictionist category, and Black respondents are about 6 times more likely. And so this effect is not new. Economists have been talking about the effect of ethnicity for a long time regarding public opinion on immigration. And so to conclude, public sentiment toward immigration in the US, at least in 2012, was characterized by 5 latent classes. There really isn't an indication of this high support for open borders that Hillary Clinton was promoting. Ethnic identification and education are very strong predictors in the direction we expect. Higher education, more acceptance. Whites are more restrictive than Hispanics or Black respondents. But this notion of the lack of social trust, being financially worse off, and placing a high value to your identity are predictors of higher restrictionist views. So the messaging that, so messages of fear of people, fear of your conditions, Black people are so bad in this country, it's so horrible, things are so bad, and loss of your American identity could be real high predictors of this restrictionist views. And so the next steps, really, because we found such a high effect of ethnicity, and it's the most natural next step to take, is to consider measurement and variance of the latent class structure by ethnic group. Do whites have the same latent class structure as ethnic minorities? And that's a question I cannot answer yet. And then once the data for ANES 2016 become available, we would consider a time invariance of this latent class structure that would allow us to consider if, try to explain what happened in 2016, if it was a structural shift of the structure of public opinion, or was it a prevalence issue where many people just shifted from one class to the other rather than the whole structural shift occurring. So thank you very much. That's my email. Feel free to contact me. I answer quickly.